All right, good morning. Welcome back here to Trader Minute. Great to have you aboard. Market here just hanging out a little bit flat. That's not the case with all stocks. In fact, we have quite a bit of movement in several areas. Let's start off with the challenge. There are no new signals on the board, though we could see several here into the close. So very interested to see how that plays out. We have Micron here on the board. I sold off a little bit into the close yesterday. Is down about 45 cents right now. Trading at 44.19. So, we're looking at the stock exit level 43.71. So we're just slightly above that by about 50 cents. Would like to see, things get a lot further above that. But, what happened? Well, last night, after the bell, we saw Texas Instruments report earnings, and that pushed all semiconductors down. And you can see the semiconductor holder ETF, the SMH, down 2% here on that. Now, if you compare that to Micron down about 1%, you go, okay, great, fine. But I don't read very much into it, and looks like the news enough to just drive another wave of chop here on Micron, which is certainly not friendly here for the challenge. Puts Micron in a position where we might get stopped on out here if that were to happen, right? If that were to happen, bottom line, next signal, we'd put about the same amount of money into it as we put into Micron and run with one until we climb on back and go forward from there. May have to. We'll see kind of how it unfolds here this afternoon and into tomorrow. Hopefully it gives us into tomorrow. But either way, we'll continue to run here. Now GLD has an upside 3-7 crossover on it this morning. This is one that could set a signal here today. We have seen a long-term consolidation here on GLD, and this is one where last challenge we were fortunate enough to hop on some GLD back here at the end of May, and it's one where we just started seeing a high consolidation risk component on the crossovers once it got up into this 140 level, and we've seen that. We've seen a lot of chop here with gold since. We're starting to see the consolidation component of it change a little bit, soften up a little bit, so we'll see if we end up with a signal here on GLD into the close today. We're not seeing the gold miners do some of the same stuff, the GOLD of the the GOLDs of the world. If we come into Newmont, we have a little bit more of a similar type action, but if we come in here to GDX, you can say just a mild little pop here on that today. Now, on the downside crossover list, we have quite a few. In fact, quite a lot. It's a little bit fewer than it was about 5 minutes ago. We have Chipotle on earnings. We have Intel and Micron on the Texas Instrument earnings. We have Nike, UPS, and Walmart. Let me show these to you. Let's start with Chipotle. Here we go on the earnings. Love to see this. As I mentioned yesterday, this is one where I'd love to see it get sold here on the earnings and maybe give us a gift down around 700. And I think there's a potential that it could do that looking at the earnings. Bottom line, it's one where the comparables are just shaping up to be a little tougher. A little bit tougher than what they have been, but I think this bullish story is still strongly intact here long term for Chipotle. Intel, if we look at that here, you can see kind of just doing the same thing as Micron, basically, just kind of that same boat, down about just over 1%, and just kind of sitting there. We also then have on the downside crossover list the UPSs of the world, which had earnings yesterday, so we're not going to see a signal out of that. We had Amazon with a downside 3-7 crossover earlier, but the little bit of rally is erasing that. Just a touch here, and then we have Nike with a downside 3-7 crossover, but nowhere close to setting a signal as it is coming off a little bit of a short-term high here. So no new signals on the board here this morning. A couple potential, they're out there in the market with gold, but on the downside crossover list, not a heck of a lot of potential there with that, unless we start to see some of the Amazons of the world, start to roll over a little bit here. But we've had the Boeings of the world report earnings this morning, getting a nice little pop here. Call options up about 50% as it sits right now. That's a big pop for a 50% move, but hey, it's nice little upside there for the bulls on Boeing after getting wrecked here this week. We saw Caterpillar earnings, and the Caterpillar earnings not pretty by the numbers, and I don't think this candle does it justice at all. In fact, if we come in and we look at Caterpillar's candle here, and how it traded after the earnings this morning, you can see the initial was a drop all the way down here to 123. So a pretty sizable drop, rallied the whole way back. Ongoing conference call happening, so still more to come there with it. But just one of those where the comparables are definitely going to be easier going into next quarter and next year. But you know what? Even though they're easier, we're still looking at negatives, and to me, that's a worry factor here for Caterpillar. Now, I talked about FCX yesterday, and how after this earnings, they're going to get into a little bit more of a easier comparable type of situation, and that I'd kind of wait till this morning to look and say, okay, you know what? The option prices are probably going to compress a lot. And, do I have a chance to play some sort of reversal if it's to the downside? The reaction of the stock is to the downside. Can I then go play, the stock to the upside? Well, take a look at the revenue. Big revenue miss here, even though expectations were low. It missed, right? It missed. Earnings per share came in just a penny below consensus here, but bottom line, just not pretty numbers at all on the revenue side or on the earnings side, right? And one of those where, okay, we'd expect a downside reaction, and do I get a chance to play it to the upside off of the downside reaction? Well, here's FCX, right? And this morning, it reports, and we see the initial down, right? We see the initial drop, and then it opens up and gets this pop. And I was disappointed to see it because, it kind of takes away some of the luster from the trade. Then we get the drop, right? We get the drop, the conference call, all of that. But then we've seen a pretty nice, upward tick here. Now, the options are down about 40%, 40 to 50%, depending on which strike you're looking at, from what they were yesterday. And that's on the weeklies. Now, the monthlies aren't down nearly as much, but they've come into an area that's a lot more interesting and a lot more compelling. All that said, given the earnings, given the reaction here so far, I'm not going to pull the trigger on them. And why? I'm not going to pull the trigger because it looks to me like flat is still a high risk. The revenue miss was significantly more than what I would want to see. I wanted to see a downside reaction with a, kind of semi-in-line numbers, maybe a little bit of a miss, but this is a little bit bigger miss than what I want to see. And so I would not be surprised to see, some consolidation that puts some of the bulls on their heels to go, you know what, I'm going to hold off here. If I'm buying this for the easy comparables going forward, well, you know what, I don't have to jump in it right at this moment. And there's still a little value on the options that can come out. So I'm going to give it just a little bit here. Again, it would not be a challenge trade as there's not a trigger on it. But that's how I'm looking at FCX here this morning. And for as much as I'd like to trade it, I'm going to hold off on it here for just a little bit. I would much prefer to be a buyer of it around 960 this morning. With it sitting around 960 or 950. Here while on video, but it is made a little bit of a charge. I just don't see the is strong of reward potential there for it for the shorter term options. So as the day progresses, as we get into tomorrow, that's when I'll start looking at some of the spread prices, some of the $10, $11 spread prices, and going, okay, is this something I can play over the course of the quarter? And that's kind of how I will, be assessing that as we go forward here. Okay. One last comment here. Texas Instruments, TXN. It was a nasty earnings. It's the kind of earnings they should have pre-reported and they didn't. And it's the type of earnings that's going to give a little bit of hangover to the sector on the day. That said, going through the earnings, I don't think it's going to weigh on the sector beyond today, but most certainly, has its noose around the sector, here today with what those numbers were. So a lot of earnings still on tap here this week, and as we start to get into next week, the earnings aren't going to impact other stocks as much. They'll just kind of impact the company that's reporting. But for now, like always, first couple weeks of earnings season, any stock can affect any other stock based on what they say as the market's trying to gather, significantly or trying to gather information overall. Okay, so holding on to Micron has not hit the stop level here. Still a little bit off of that. So holding on to that. Would love to see it rally, turn green here today. I think that'd be a real positive sign for it going forward. But we'll see how that plays out. We could have a signal on gold by the end of the day. So if we do, we'll see what we have to do to manage and make that happen. Thanks for hopping on. Have yourselves a fantastic day, and we'll talk to you later. Take care.